We're happy to see Informatics students, faculty members, as well as members of the public here at our City campus. We're also excited to be joined by a live webinar by viewers, including Informatics Global Campus online students in Singapore, Malaysia, China, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Nepal, and Zimbabwe. The University of Portsmouth is a leading modern university with a strong reputation for teaching and student satisfaction, and it has been a university partner of Informatics Global Campus, IGC, for many years. IGC offers degrees in computing, business information systems, and technology management and computing, awarded by the University of Portsmouth via an e-learning platform. Our speaker, Dr. Nick Savage, is the head of the School of Computing at the University of Portsmouth and has a passion for investigating communication networks and security. Dr. Savage obtained a first-class honours degree in electronic and computer engineering, an MA with distinction in university teaching, and a PhD in telecommunications from the University of Portsmouth. He also has an MSc in mathematics from the Open University. His previous research on communication networks has resulted in contributions to recommendations of the International Telecommunication Union. Dr. Savage has over 50 publications in journals and conference proceedings and serves as a referee for the Institution of Engineering and Technology, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and Elsevier journals. This evening, Dr. Savage will be talking to us about system security for IoT, or the Internet of Things. Dr. Savage.
Thank you very much. Well, I've been informed that I need to have a microphone in front of me so that it enables everyone to hear me, plus our guests online to hear what I've got to say. So, thank you for the introduction. I'm going to give a talk about system security, and in particular system security for Internet of Things. I've paced this talk for people who know an awful lot about security, but also I've paced this talk to give some background into what Internet of Things is, and some background with regards to security threats we've had in the past, and how those threats may manifest themselves on things that we're going to sense the environment with, things that we're going to use to actuate our environment or make decisions and make changes to our environment, and how those things are connected together. However, if I could just direct you to the sunny side of the world, as it's raining here. I am from the UK. The UK is a part of Europe, and Portsmouth is indicated by this very nice Google map icon right on the south side of the island. And where am I going next? Here are some vague pictures of what I want to talk about, and I'm going to have to do some pointing. So what I want to talk about today is the Internet of Things and the systems approach to identifying possible vulnerabilities that will exist in deployments of things being connected to the Internet. And an example of a thing, I have an example of a thing on my wrist here. This is a watch that has Bluetooth, and this watch is able to sense. So it's able to sense the environment, has light sensors in it. It's also able to sense my heart, so it has a sensor to be able to tell my heart pumping blood around my body. It doesn't really actuate, and by actuate I mean do something. It vibrates a little bit when I get text messages, but that's it. Now, I wouldn't consider this a thing, because in the Internet of Things, we tend to think of things as having an IP address. So if you're happy with the Internet protocol, so if you ever experienced the number 192.168.0.1, whatever else, that's IP version 4 address. And we have a new version of IP called IP version 6 that gives us billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of addresses. And that means we're able to give IP addresses and connect things to the Internet. The things that we're looking at, I have two icons on the screen here, one of which is a set of gears, and I'll use that icon to mean it's an actuator, and that means that this will do something to the environment. And I have another thing that has some sort of wavy lines coming out of it, and what I mean by that is it's a sensor, and that means it's going to sense the environment in some way or another. So, my presentation, I'm going to give an overview. We'll look at some system vulnerabilities. We'll look at some system vulnerabilities, some technical vulnerabilities associated with systems that we're using now. I will attempt to go through some of the threats that we experience on the internet now. We can have a discussion about how those threats may manifest themselves onto networks of things, the Internet of Things. And then I'm going to highlight what I consider to be some interesting things about the Internet of Things. This is a very weird presentation. So, we'll start off with things. There we are. I have my sensor and I have my actuator. That's good. My sensor, the thing to bear in mind, I'm sensing the environment in whatever way that is, video, sound, temperature, etc. And then I have the ability to perform some action. So my other thing, my actuator, is I'm going to be able to perform some action. So let's take this room, for example. If we had things that were deployed within the library here, we may have some sensors, some video sensors. Those video sensors may have some intelligence on them that are do quite difficult things like count how many people are in a room. And then because a certain number of people in the room, it means that the air temperature is going to go up. So before the air temperature goes up, we're going to turn the air conditioning on slightly higher. So we're able to react in a much more responsive way to the environment and to changes in the environment in order to help, well, our comfort in this room. But we can also do things, and that's the principal aspect of connecting all these things together. We can also do things to ensure that we can grab additional data about whatever system we're dealing with, and that might be our inventory system. It may be identifying security within airports. It may be managing our road system. I'm always amazed when I come to Singapore that you don't have cars just lining all the way down the road because of the traffic light system. Something that works here. I then have the internet. My internet is a connection, so this here happens to be the interconnectivity of a fairly large internet company called Level 3. And it just means that we're piping cables, we have underwater cables, we have lots of underwater cables coming into Singapore. We have cables going from one city to another, and we're interconnected, so we have interconnected networks. We refer to that as being an internet. How many internets do we have in the world? One. So we have one internet. So the purposes are things, this is the Internet of Things, our things will have an internet IP address, and they'll be connected to this very large interconnected network. That means that they're accessible from anywhere. That means that we possibly are able to actuate them. We're possibly able to sample the data that they're gathering. And that's where we start to come into security vulnerabilities. So, here's my little use case, particularly relevant because of road systems. And what we have here is a nice little map of Portsmouth, and a nice map of Portsmouth with the University of Portsmouth in the centre of it, and some roads that can get slightly congested because of weird one-way systems that we have in Portsmouth. And what I put on those roads is I put some sensors on the roads. I'm saying there are some sensors here. And these sensors are able to do things like count how many cars are driving towards them. So that's quite a simple thing. I can identify cars, I can identify speed of cars, that's very easy. I can count how many cars are coming. So I can manage traffic flow. That's quite important for the happiness of the people of the University of Portsmouth and the people of Portsmouth. Now, what I'm then able to do is I'm then able to actuate with these things. So I can actuate, I can change the traffic lights. I can change the traffic lights in order to maximize the flow of cars through my city. So that's a really easy case. Now, from a security point of view, if these sensors are able to sense data and then cause a change in my system, so we're able to change traffic light from red to green, and they're connected to the internet, that means that, well, firstly, I may be able to get access to the data that's being generated, which I don't care too much about that, but maybe I'm able to change the data that's being generated and change the message that's being sent from these sensors to the traffic lights. And what you really want is a little button on your dashboard of your car that says green. So whenever you come to the traffic lights, they change to the colour green. That's quite nice. Now, what you might also do is think of a scenario that's going to cause gridlock, that is going to cause a city to become unable to function. An example of that is where we just turn all the traffic lights to red. That causes large amounts of cars to start piling back. People can't get to where they want to go. Or even better, we're able to sense how fast cars are coming towards the traffic lights. Cars are speeding, we put 2 lights at green, cars crash into one another. We have ambulances that need to get to the place where this accident has happened. So I take this analogy and I move that to what we currently see on the internet. So is anybody here who hasn't heard of denial of service? That's great, everybody has. So there is a thing that you can do with internet systems where I can take down an internet system, so whatever, I don't know, you want to go to www.singtel.com.sg, I can prevent you from getting access to their website. We call that denial of service. So multiple ways that I can do that. One of the most common being, I'm just going to send lots of traffic to the website, which blocks a legitimate request getting to that website. So what we see at the moment is, well, people will cause denial of service against a particular website at the same time they're performing some other exploit or some vulnerability. So I'm sending lots of traffic to your website, or at the same time I'm doing something that's a little bit naughty somewhere else in your system while you're not paying attention to it. Let's abstract that to our Internet of Things. Well, I'm causing your system, your city, to gridlock, or I'm causing accidents to occur in your city, while at the same time I'm doing something else. So I'm able to divert the attention of the emergency services while I'm doing something else in your city. And so things like, it's a trite example, things like robbing a bank, I've now diverted all of the emergency services to go and deal with these faulty traffic lights. There's not enough police to stop me from robbing this bank. And that's an interesting scenario for our cyberspace as applied to the Internet of Things. So I have a nice image. Someone's going to use the computer for me. And this just happens to be an image of the Internet of Things and how it can be applied to our domain that we currently live in. And there's some interesting words that are used here. This is an image that's taken from a UK website called The Register, so it's a news site only about technology news. We can start in the center and we see some words like big data. That means that I have perhaps lots, or I have complex amounts of data. I can store them in the cloud and I can process them in somewhere or another. We have what I've just been talking about, traffic monitoring. We have the ability to increase safety of the roads because we're using the Internet of Things. We're sensing and we're performing actions based on the information we get from those sensors. We can, I told you my watch monitors my heart rate. That can be uploaded immediately to my doctor, or we can do things within a hospital to identify where people are, what they're doing, and who is most at risk, and where we need to put medical staff, where we need to put medical care. We can put this into the house, so you can do things like, as people may have already, you may already have a thing in your house that controls the air conditioning. In the UK we need heating. So I have a thing in my house that controls my heating, and I can access that from anywhere, and I can turn my heating on and off. Now if you're naughty, you can cause me a problem by keeping my heating on all the time at 30 degrees Celsius, which requires a lot of energy to heat my house to 30 degrees Celsius, which just costs me a lot of money. Or you can do other things like heat my house and having to know where my radiators are located, where things that could be flammable are located, and you cause a fire in my house. Oh, that's a little bit nasty. I don't like that quite so much. But as we move over around this world, we move into very interesting systems. And these systems we refer to as being special because they're called critical national infrastructure. So anything that's related to energy, anything that's related to our industrial output, anything that's related to network systems, we refer to these as being critical national infrastructure. And if something happens to them and it goes offline, that is deemed to be normally quite bad. So our Internet of Things, I can put things into my energy supply. I can put things into any industrial system. I can put things into my network, so I can have an Internet of Things within my Internet. That's quite cool. And all of these are going to sense data about the system that they're looking at. And again, once we're sensing data, we might be using that data in order to make decisions, and some of those decisions we might want to make automatically. What I'm interested in is how can I force my system to change what it's doing, to make actions or take actions on incorrect data. And I had a, can I go back to my presentation now? Thank you very much. I have a few use cases and what we refer to as being misuse cases. So my use case is actually very simple. Any system that I've got that is generating data, aka any system, where I can use that data in order to generate more business value, I'm able to get a product to a customer faster at a more appropriate time, or more societal value, which means they're better able to manage the city or the government or the medical system that I'm living in. That's where I can apply Internet of Things. So I have the ability to make a step change in any system by being able to sense data, by being able to react, to be able to actuate, make decisions based on the data that I'm sensing. Now, this is where, if you haven't yet heard of these terms, so data science, data analytics, this is where this steps in, because my data that I'm sensing, I can mine that data, I can identify trends, I can identify how my product is best used. It also means that we might take some techniques, some number processing techniques, we might apply those at the source of the data, my sensor, in order to only send the data that I need to send. I can process data before it's being communicated. Now my misuse case, well, my first misuse case is there anything from this communication, from this processing that's going on, that I can use in order to do nefarious things to the system? So am I able to mine a person's behavior? Am I able to make decisions based on a person's behavior, based on the way that I'm able to tell them moving around? I'm able to mine information. The classic one from password security, based on how long it takes to generate an encryption key, I can have a guess as to what your password is that generates that encryption key. So am I able to mine any data out of the system that is being used, where I can perhaps use that information either to take control or to change what happens? And how can I generate fake messages that can then be acted upon by the actuator? So my two misuse cases are acting on the data that's being generated or generating fake messages that are going to go to my actuator. Now, my view of Internet of Things, I didn't put any pictures here, but I was giving a talk just after, if anyone remembers the Boston bombs, I think in 2011, so there was a bomb that went off in Boston. And that timeline was, for me, it was really interesting, because it was a timeline where the news, of course, the news reports now immediately when things happen, and as the news was reporting, it was getting more and more images from mobile phones about what happened at the time these bombs went off. So I gave a talk, actually I think the day after this bomb went off, where I couldn't comprehend, because we have the technology now to do this, I couldn't comprehend why all of this data can't be gathered very rapidly. And that led me to think, well, this is just the Internet of Things. You know, your mobile phone is taking a video of something, you're taking pictures of something, you're sensing something on your mobile phone. Now, let's say I'm able to do that at any point in time, and I can use whatever sensors you have in your body or person in order to query this hypothetical Internet of Things. So when something happens, when a crisis occurs, you say, give me all the information in relation to that crisis. Now, that means that, well, I now think it's me receiving this, but I can just send that to a system and get a system to make decisions. So I can get decisions along the lines of, I get responses to say, well, what happened? And get responses that may give me an answer to, well, what caused this to happen? Now, in my mind, what I'm seeing is, instead of saying, dear public, can you please send us pictures and videos of this incident that occurred, I'm able to see very rapidly the incident that occurred, and within, in my mind, seconds, maybe minutes, I'm able to identify key people that I want to talk to. And in fact, I have an idea about where they are, because they're running down the road. Now for me that's great. From a societal point of view, I think that's great. I may even be able to put into place what remedies, and even how quickly I can put these remedies for any crisis that I see in place. Now this is a very different system. I think it's sort of a very open Internet of Things system, where I can query the Internet of Things, I can query the Internet at a generic level, which is very different to the system that we have at the moment. And I'm able to get responses that allow me to make decisions that are very specific to my particular problem. And that's very different to guys, it's just very different from what we have at the moment. But this is where I think we'll end up. I really do think we'll end up here for our Internet of Things. Now, that then makes you think, if this is where we're headed, we're going to head to a position where you can ask the Internet of Things questions that will then give you lots of complicated answers, which will drive you to make a decision, drive you to take an action. Well, how can you fake all this? How can you force a decision that really shouldn't be made? So and this is where we get technical, I look at what we currently have, and I'm going to detail 4 security vulnerabilities here. I'm just looking at people's faces and going, okay, has anyone here heard of cross-site forgery requests? If that's a no, that's an interesting thing. Cross-site forgery requests are incredibly easy to explain. Usually in a web browser, you have more than one tab open. Yep. So on one of these tabs on your web browser, you may have authenticated against a system. And let's say, because this is a good argument, you've authenticated against your bank in one tab of your web browser. That means your web browser now has the authentication credentials to communicate with the server of your bank. At the same time, you're surfing the internet on other tabs, because we do multiple things nowadays. And let's say you go to a YouTube video, and as a part of that YouTube video, as it's playing in your web browser, there's a little bit of code within the YouTube video that causes your web browser to communicate to the server you're currently logged into and to transfer lots of money from one place to another, from your bank account to the hacker's bank account. So this is a really well-known problem, cross-site forgery request. It's a very, as I said, I hope I explained it adequately. The number one security resolution for you is never have multiple tabs open, particularly in banking. The other one being cross-site scripting, which is sort of similar. In the example I've given here, there are multiple definitions of different types of cross-site scripting, but I've given a definition, or I've given a picture that describes a persistent, where I'm able to have computer code. My computer code exists in a web forum. When someone goes to that web forum, that computer code is executed by the person's browser, and the execution of that computer code causes something naughty to happen on their computer. I then have things like SQL injection, which everybody should know about because there's been so many companies that have been hacked, that have had information stolen because of SQL injection. In the UK, we had a company, a mobile phone company called TalkTalk, that had a fair amount of information stolen using SQL, well, we think using SQL injection. And then finally, there's a technique whereby you can take control of someone's computer, you can gain access to all of their information by exploiting vulnerabilities in the way that computer processes data. And I've just referred to that as being memory corruption. This is technically very, very difficult. But with enough money, you can buy the brains to enable you to do this in a reliable manner. So those are some technical vulnerabilities that currently exist. Now, what threats do we have to exploit these technical vulnerabilities? Well, our threat space, at the moment, I've just split this off into some really simplistic things. Outage. Is anybody here who hasn't heard of, well, there's not many people who have actually heard of denial of service. This is denial of service. The D in front of it means distributed. It just means that there are multiple computers around the world sending requests to a server, so we're distributing the request. And all those requests added up called denial of service. There are two, over the last couple of months, there's been a hacking group called Armada Collective. In the past 2 years now, there's DD4BC, which is distributed denial of service for Bitcoin. And both of these hacking groups cause a very short, sharp denial of service against the server, and then say, give us some money, or we're going to take you offline. Well, they actually say, give us some bitcoins, or we're going to take you offline. So that is financially driven. And then you have a hacking group called Anonymous, that you may have heard of. And then they tend to be sort of politically or ideology driven. And actually, if we go down, so it's targeted attacks, stuff like, if you've heard of Stuxnet, was targeted to one very particular system and aimed to do something very particular, and that happened to have been, guessing, again, politically or ideology driven. And then lastly, there's some interesting sort of social engineering stuff with phishing. I don't know if anyone's seen the LinkedIn databases. That's surfaced again because we've now cracked most of the passwords in the LinkedIn databases that were stolen in 2011. But your key here, okay, my Internet of Things, what is it going to be targeted with? Well, it could be targeted with outage, so I can turn it off. That can be quite bad. And it's actually really easy to turn it off because I can just send these sensors lots of data. They're very small form, they have very little power, they have very little memory, they have very little connectivity. It's very easy to take them offline. Why does someone want to do that? Well, they may be financially driven, they may want money. Okay, that's something that I need to consider when I'm deploying Internet of Things in the future. Or they may be politically or ideology driven. So there may be some other reason in their psyche for why they want to do this. There's another group here of people that might want to do this because they can. And the group of people who want to do things because they can usually are doing these sort of things. It's fun to do, let's do it. Our targeted attacks, well, frankly, this sort of stuff may be state-sponsored, and most of the people that I know start to ignore the investment you need to protect yourself against state-sponsored attacks. So people generally ignore it. And that means that we're actually down to outage, and then we're possibly down to phishing. What happened to phishing? Are you going to use social engineering against the Internet of Things? No, because the whole point of my Internet of Things is that it's automatic. These things are happening automatically. So what I'm really interested in is, well, how can outage occur? How can, and why might outage occur on my Internet of Things? Now, all these vulnerabilities occur because of a lack of trust between systems. So I put a really high level look at the Internet of Things. We're going to have a sensor, we're going to have a communications module, we're going to have some form of communication, we're going to have some form of data analysis that takes place somewhere, and that data analysis is then going to have some communication. I've just missed that out if it's too big to get on the page. And then we're going to have some form of action being taken by our actuator. Now, of course, there are many subcomponents within this system, but that's pretty much my system. Now, that means that I can cause Internet of Things to lie. So this is on my generating data part. I can force it to generate false data by injecting into the sensor, by injecting into the communications module, by intercepting and relaying the communication that takes place, by changing the processing that occurs within the data analysis side, and even by intercepting or changing the communication that goes to the actuator. And even in between all of these systems, I have subsystems that are then able to force changes to occur. Now, that's a lot of systems where I can inject fake data. That's a lot of systems that I can use in order to bypass what my functionality should be. And my big problem with my things in the Internet of Things is, well, they tend to be small. They tend to have very little power because they should be low power consumption devices. They tend to have limited computing resources, and they tend not to have high connectivity. You don't have connectivity to multiple networks in multiple forms. I don't have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. I tend only to have one type of communication that my device can have. And the problem with ensuring my security requirements, that I'm not injecting bad data, that I'm not allowing my device to be taken offline, is that I tend to need quite a lot of power, and that is power because I need to process stuff. because I need lots of computing resources that I don't have, and some of the techniques that we could use require a fairly high level of communication from my device. So from the outset, it's interesting, my things actually don't have all the requirements that I need in order to have my standard design for enforcing security. Now that means that when we're designing the things that will go into my Internet of Things, I think it's a good idea to consider each of the different sections so that we're aware of what can happen as information goes from the environment as it actually is, all the way through to our actuator. So guys, now that I've given sort of an overview of things, an overview of the Internet, an overview of the Internet of Things, covered some vulnerabilities, covered some threats to those, and then covered some needs that we have from the things, I have some advice. This is what we need to consider. So my very first one is, in relation to secure booting, I have my Internet of Things device, and that Internet of Things device is going to exist somewhere. Now, the easiest way for me to change the functionality of my thing is to change the operating system, is to change the way that it functions when it turns on. Now, that means that when my device is switched on, we need to have some hardwired method that allows my thing to be updated software-wise, because software always needs to be updated. So I'm checking the integrity of the software, and I'm checking the authenticity of the software. So my authenticity check is to ensure that the software that I'm about to run has come from the right place. So I haven't allowed someone externally to download their own software onto my thing. The integrity means that the software that I'm about to run is correct. So these two things we need from our thing from the moment that we turn it on. And that's mildly related to updates to my thing. So as I said, I could consider my wristwatch to be a thing. My wristwatch, of course, is turned on, and it also has software updates. And those software updates, I assume, come from the correct place. It's very nice if they don't. It's very important. My software update should arrive, and I should have some mechanism of authenticating that update, that patch, which should be exactly the way that your machine, your PC, your laptop, your tablet, any machine that you're currently interacting with actually performs. I may have a requirement to do things like plugging modules into a kernel. And as I said that, I'm not too sure that everyone understands what a kernel is. So my base of my operating system, and my modules are a set of code that I can plug into the base of my operating system. This allows me to do fundamentally different things with my thing. I'm not just putting another application on top of my operating system, I'm changing my operating system. And maybe I may be able to do that in runtime. So your thing devices may be built on a version of Linux. Linux allows you to hot plug kernel modules. I can change the functionality of my kernel while the device is currently running. Now, your functionality is always going to need updating. And that update can't compromise safety. It can't force the thing to turn off, or if it does, you must be able to control that in some way to ensure that whatever your thing is being used for is safe. And typically, if it's safe, we consider it to be secure. We will then have on our thing some application that is going to be taking the sensed data and communicating that sensed data somewhere. And this is where you'll see my nice little picture at the bottom here. I have this fake data being input into my system as a possible scenario. So I have an application that's driving the thing. This application is going to receive, I've used the word hard interrupt here. It's going to receive some information that's probably going to cause a hard interrupt on my operating system. That operating system is then going to move that information from this electronic input, and it's going to pass it as an input into my application, and the application is then going to do something with it. So I need some mechanism of verifying my input data within my thing, within my device, to ensure that the input data has actually come from the sensor, to ensure that the hard interrupt that I'm receiving is what I expect to receive from whatever little electronic device is causing the sensing to take place. Now I say, how is my input verified? And for those of you who have heard of cross-site scripting or SQL injection or buffer overflows, this is all down to the fact that I need to sanitize, I need to verify the input coming into my system. Because at the moment, what we know about is an input into a system. If it contains commands or control, that's usually a very bad thing. So I need to be able to verify the data. I need to understand how this input can be changed. And in understanding that, I need to ensure the output from my application is consistent with this input. So once I have my sensed data, I need to ensure that I have secure communications in some way. So once my device is turned on, it may be that I need to authenticate with something before that is going to receive and accept the data that I'm going to send. It may be that the messages that I'm sending have to be passed through various subsystems in order to ensure consistency. And any time I'm going to pass my message format, I have a possibility of vulnerability. Any time that I'm exchanging information from one system to the next, I have a possibility of vulnerabilities, and I have the possibility of injecting stuff that shouldn't be into my communication stream. I've used here, we may use, if anyone's heard of JSON, we may use a particular format of data. And if every single Internet thing used exactly the same format of data, that means I can have, if you remember earlier, my utopia, my scenario where I'm able to query, write generic queries for devices, and then get feedback, as long as I ensure that the result format that I'm getting back from my system is valid. Now, I've mentioned a lot, we need to verify, we need to authenticate, we need to ensure that things are valid. Now, one of the areas, research-wise at the moment, that I think is incredibly lacking is encryption. We currently use encryption for more than it should be used for. And one of the things that we use encryption for, which we should be using encryption for, is to transform data so that it's no longer readable. We use encryption to hide data. What we also use encryption for is we use encryption to verify an identity. We're using encryption to authenticate devices and human beings. And we use encryption to facilitate authorization decisions. And to me, that just seems a little bit weird, because encryption should only be hiding data. It just so happens that the process of hiding data means that we can do all these other things. I think that's a mistake. I don't know if anyone follows me on that, but it's odd that we have a system in place that is doing one thing and is now doing multiple other things that it isn't actually designed for. And so when it comes to these sort of things, authenticating patches, ensuring the software integrity, and verifying the software integrity, when it comes to those, my mind immediately goes to cryptographic techniques that I can use to do that. And that feels wrong. Now, there are some researchers around that are looking at different techniques where we can verify identity, where we can authenticate, where we can make decisions about authorization without using cryptographic techniques. And I think there's a lot of work that can be done within the Internet of Things field in order to achieve that. There's also a lot of work that's been done on information leaks. We have a few researchers in Boston that are looking at information leaks from the Internet of Things. And then the next thing that I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done is the forensic implications of information that is being generated from my Internet of Things. At the moment, well, we have a PC in this nice lectern here, and that PC is generating information that's being recorded in a log file, We have a history in our web browser at application level. We have a history of a log file. We have forensically verifiable information. We have forensically verifiable information that's contained within the operating system because of the way the operating system works. When I talk about forensics with students tend to come back to me and say, well, it's very easy. We're just going to log everything. And we're just going to generate all the data that we want in the world because we want to see everyone's exact action. Now, when you start to have billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of devices, we don't have the computing power in order to take that information and mine it. And so there are some new and novel techniques that I feel we can apply to the Internet of Things in order to do what we want to do, which is verify what has happened if something nefarious happens to my traffic policing Internet of Things, or network of things connected to the Internet, that I have around my city. Because I want to prosecute someone for crashing cars. I want to prosecute someone for pushing a green light every time they come up to the traffic lights. So I need a mechanism of verifying that, so our forensic systems need to change. The last thing is the business implications of this. I hope, so I got to this point now, or I hope you're saying, well, this is just really stupid. You can't have lots of these devices going around. It feels relatively simple to fake data, to cause systems to change, to cause systems not to monitor, not to have accurate information, and make decisions on inaccurate information. So why do you want to deploy Internet of Things? Well, firstly, it's very easy to give you an idea on the data on your assets. So where your assets are, that's quite simple. What condition your assets are in, again, that's quite simple. And these two things help you make business decisions. How much protection do we need to give to that asset? When do we need to replace the asset? It gives you an idea on current and potential customer data, what your customers are doing, the devices that you've given them, what your customers are doing in the marketplace that you exist. So when you can market to them, how you can advertise better, how you can advertise at a better time. It also gives you the ability to control the systems that you have in place. So we're talking retrofitting just as an example, oil and gas industry, retrofitting sensors in order to identify possible problems on pipes. We in the UK, we have a lot of underground piping that was put in place 30, 40 years ago. And if that piping breaks, it's quite bad. It's relatively cheap to just throw loads of sensors into the piping to identify what the stress levels are to see when we need to change the pipes before they break. So we can do these sort of things as well. And guys, that brings me to the end of my presentation, which is smack on the time I was supposed to finish, even though I started 15 minutes late. Oh, that means that I'm taking questions.
In general, would it be considered secure to simply use the encryption that is embedded in our 3G and 4G network?
Would it be deemed to be secure?
Yeah.
Well, the problem with asking that question is you say, would it be deemed to be secure against what threat? And then when you classify your threat, I'll be able to tell you, well, no, I think that it's secure.
Say for eavesdropping,
Well, general eavesdropping is fine, yeah. I mean, if you're saying, is it secure against government agencies? Is it secure against somebody who has an awful lot of money? And the reason I say this is because there's a great case back in Athens. This actually happened in 2004, where you have all of the encryption that goes on from mobile phone mast to mobile device. But that data from the mobile phone mast across the cellular, your cellular backbone network, if you're going onto the public switch telephone network, that isn't encrypted.
Yeah.
So actually, some of the switches that you use there, you can generate backup streams. So I can take a copy of every stream coming from your mobile device. It's not encrypted. Even if it was, if I can get to one of those switches, I can decrypt it anyway. So you say, well, all I need is someone who works for one of these companies that deals with the internal switches, and I can get that information. So when you say, is it secure? Well, yes, it is, absolutely. With a limited amount of resource, with a limited amount of money, yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Guys, any other questions?
What about being tracked?
What about?
Being tracked.
tracked.
Yes.
What are my thoughts on that?
No. How do we get tracked when using the internet?
There are multiple ways to do that. So one way to track you is with your IP address. That's generally considered to be not very good. There's some functionality with an IP, which means that I can forge my IP address, you can forge your IP address. The ISP that you connect with shouldn't allow forged IP source addresses to get access to the internet. Typically, most ISPs don't filter those out. And you can actually have the message come back to you using something called IP source routing. A lot of ISPs actually filter out source routing, so you can't do that. So let me answer your question rather than going off on a tangent. You can be tracked with your internet usage by your IP address. So if you're at home and you're connecting to the internet and you surf to www. I'm going to choose the name of the UK banks, Barclays.co.uk. That bank will register your IP address as completing a TCP connection and making a HTTP request from the web server. That will be logged. You can hide your IP address by using a network called Tor, the Onion Routing Network, and that uses a series of encryption techniques in order to prevent the person who you're communicating with from knowing which IP address. And it also prevents the intermediary devices from knowing what information you're transmitting. It is, yes. Yeah. There's lots of reasons not to use Tor, as well as possible reasons for using Tor. So the other ways that you can actually track is I can take a fingerprint of your usage against a particular website, and I can deem that to be a biometric fingerprint of you. And I can match within a particular probability your usage of a computer system, and then match that to your usage.
So the iPhone, is it? Like the iPhone fingerprint lock?
Well, the iPhone fingerprint is a physical fingerprint. This is, when I say a fingerprint, what I mean is it's the way that you use a device.
Oh.
So you've probably seen people who do gait. There's lots of things like gait recognition that can identify someone based on the way they walk. You can identify someone based on the way they hear. You can identify someone based on the way they interact with other people. There's a lot of research done at MIT in the late 90s on this. So that's 20 years ago. And we can use that data in order to identify individuals. Or if not individuals, we can reduce a set of people, let's say from 6.5 billion, down to a subset that's a lot smaller. And the other way we can do it is when you connect to an external web server. So when I need a board and a pen. When you make a HTTP request, okay, there's a TCP connection that goes out, a TCP connection that comes back, and a TCP connection that goes out again. That's called a TCP three-way handshake. So that is a SYN flag set on a TCP packet, a SYN and an ACK flag set on a TCP packet coming back, and then an acknowledgement going back. Once you have that three-way handshake, you then send a HTTP request. So let's say you're doing this through Tor. You're trying to anonymize yourself, okay? So at the IP layer, which is before the TCP header, at the IP layer, your IP address isn't your IP address. So what the server is seeing is not your IP address. You've hidden that using the Tor network. At TCP layer, there's information within that TCP layer that's been generated based on your computer. So the flags, and the way that we change the flags in TCP, your computer will react in a particular way. Now that might give me an idea of what operating system you're using. Okay? So even though you hide your IP address, I might be able to guess your operating system based on flags in TCP. We then come to the application layer, and in HTTP, unless you hide it, you give away information about your browser. So even you've hidden your IP address, that's great. There's information about your operating system, there's information about your browser. There may even be information within your browser that will narrow down the number of people using, I don't know, Windows 8 and Chrome version 17 or whatever else. So I can narrow down from 6.5 billion people in the world to a good estimate of your operating system, a good estimate of the application you're using, and perhaps even different configurations of the application you're using. So basically, you can't hide. Okay.
Thanks.
All right.
We just take more questions from.
There's a question from someone in the live webinar.
Oh, brilliant.
Security aspect.
So, I'm asking about security. I'm asking about security aspect, about the cryptography with proper programming. I need to ask, so Mohammed, I hope you can hear me. If you're able to type anything, I really need you to clarify what you mean by proper programming. And I can begin to answer if you mean secure programming.
Like Java or Microsoft, anything like that. .NET.
Okay, so
Which is the proper one.
Can you repeat that clarification, please?
Yes, I can hear you. I mean, like, which is the proper programming language that it's used to secure this communication, the request between the application and the server, the big data, the cloud.
Okay.
The best technology.
Okay, you're asking multiple questions there. So the proper programming language, there isn't a proper programming language. You can use whatever programming language you want. And the reason why you can is because your programming language is up at the application layer. And the application layer is then going to use a library that's accessible to your operating system in order to do the communication.
Okay.
Okay, so you can use Java, you can use C, you can use C++, and the way that the communication is formatted will be exactly the same on the same operating system.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
And there's some other things. If you use C and C++, you have inherent vulnerabilities that you may not want to introduce. So if you're communicating with the server, you can build those queries using whatever programming language you want.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. Was there anything about the cryptography part that you wanted to ask?
Yes. About the cryptography, I'm asking also in the same platform the format of the technology that you'll use. So I think from my own point of view, you'll be using the same technology that you encrypted with it. But how can the server correspond with it, since they have different technologies?
Okay.
Like, for example, the server probably is going to be using another type of operation system, another type of technology. I'm looking for the common ground for it.
Okay, let me. Can I flip back? Is that possible? So we already have solutions to this. And the solution, you may know the solution is SSL, or you may know the solution as Secure Sockets Layer, or you may know the solution as being TLS, which is Transport Layer Security, which is what we tend to consider this being the solution. So my thing can communicate with the server, and my current solution is I have a negotiation about what encryption is going to be used. And I then have a decision based on my thing and my server about which encryption both are able to speak, regardless of what operating system they use. And that enables me to have an encrypted link. Now, the reason why the encryption can work is because it's something called a digital certificate, which tends to be, we have a standard for that as well, it's X509 certificate, that can then be used in the communication. The reason why I flipped back here is because, well, I'm now using quite a few steps in order to have this encryption agreed upon. I might be using, depending on what algorithms are used, I may be using a little more power than I need to. But I'm using computing resources in order to do this. So it's effective. X509 is effective for your standard computer. You have computing facilities, you have power, you have the ability to process this. It may not be quite so appropriate for the things.
Thank you.
The question is, Nick, do you have a solution? Unfortunately, I'm not able to give you one.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Rich, I have a question to ask about security in general.
Yeah.
Do you feel that this thing about security is somewhat overblown? That very often it's not due to evil genius, but rather it's simply because services on the web are getting just too hard to configure, and people are not doing it properly.
I think that all of our security vulnerabilities are due to people not doing it properly. Yes. Does that?
Yeah, what I mean is that we have spent so much time and energy into cryptography technology or security technology, but really what causes vulnerability is simply the way that it's being used, rather than pure evil genius that somehow is able to breach those security.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. So what I consider is it's in the design of the system that you're using and the implementation of that design.
Yeah.
If you don't do that accurately, then you'll have security vulnerabilities. And when you begin to look at development life cycles for whatever you're thinking about developing, security tends to be thrown in at the end. And that isn't, Microsoft developed the security development lifecycle, SDL, which Microsoft says that it uses for all projects. I'm not too sure what it does. And other places say that they're using SDL as well, which looks to integrate security requirements at an early stage of the project specification. And that is what really needs to be done. And you have vulnerabilities because people aren't doing things properly.
Because when we undertake certain project, if you start with security in mind, then you probably will not start the project actually.
Well, that's because
because look at some of when we talk about Internet of Things, although we spend a lot of energy and time again on the transmission of the thing outside the premise, but if you look at existing network like BACnet and Modbus, they are inherently insecure. And if you were to start with that in mind, then you will never do any project, because the moment you plug a building into the internet, you're exposing yourself.
I think so. I would just clarify that based on. I think at that stage in the project, you need to be clear about what your threats are and what threats you want to protect against. So if you say, well, this is never going to be secure, you're right. You're never going to make it secure. But what you can do is to take measures to prevent a large number of security vulnerabilities and hope, fingers crossed, that those security vulnerabilities are the ones that will be most likely found in the future if they were there. That's not a very good answer.
I agree with you, there are no good answers, so I think we just have to take that in a proper perspective, and not throw the baby out of the water, so to speak.
Absolutely, you can't stop a project because you need to consider it, but consider it in a
but increasingly that has become a larger and larger stumbling block. People will just, the IT security guy will stand up and more than half the meeting is spent addressing it. And it just goes nowhere because I can never please the guy.
Yeah, get somebody else. Because this is the whole. I'm sorry. I made that comment. It was rude. I apologize.
No.
But the point is, and this is what a lot of people in the security profession are saying. It's not about you can't do that. It's about let's facilitate. Let's help you do that, and let's facilitate and help you do that in a secure manner. As long as when we say secure, we're bearing in mind who our threats are. So they should be saying, okay, my initial reaction is no, but we should be doing this. How can we do this securely? Because your root of security is confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
But half the time I don't get options. I get a lot of opinion. Really. From the security folks.
Yeah. I'll go back to my original because it's clear.
Yeah.
We as a security community, I'm aware of that as a negative image. And it is one that myself, many of my colleagues are attempting to get rid of. Because it isn't about don't do that, it's about we can do that, and this is the way that we can do that in a secure manner. The only problem is if you say, but can we do that without any additional cost? That's
No, I fundamentally ask them, how can I make it secure to your satisfaction. And most of the time, I don't get options.
It's never possible.
Yeah.
100%.
But on the other hand, we have a business need to build.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a hassle.
And
I got to be honest with you that the situation gets worse and worse by the day.
Good grief.
Yeah, because whenever something happens, the media just blow it out of hand. And that's how we feel about it.
When something happens, the media doesn't blow it out of hand.
Yeah.
But the thing the example with TalkTalk in the UK, so Dido, who's the chief executive officer of TalkTalk, was there about 12 hours after the press release of what had happened. We have lots of customers' data that's been stolen. Some of that data is personal. It's not. In the UK, there's personal data and there's very personal data. Very personal data is stuff like medical records. Personal data is your name, where you live. We have personal data that's been stolen, and that might include your credit card information. And the standard thing is, you look at her over the next 4 days, and you see the impact of this. That this happens at board level. You see, it becomes strange. You can tell she's not slept very much. And as we say, well, do you know what? This has happened. If it's happened because you've done something stupid, you need to fix it, and you need not to do stupid things in the future. But if it's happened because you've taken all of the precautions that any sensible security expert will tell you to take, then you're really unlucky.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. But it should be. This is a risk to business reputation. This is a risk to your business being able to continue to function. That should be a board level. But the people who are helping you underneath you should be saying, here are your options. Here's what you can do to mitigate that risk.
Yeah.
It's all about cost effectiveness as well. How much money can you afford to put into security?
Yes.
Versus the risk of if you don't do it.
And that is it's a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, so for the stock exchange, sure, you've got a lot of money. You have to make sure that you spend as much as you can on security. But if you're your average, that's really, you don't.
We had a little conversation about this outside.
But I mean, if you're an average small to medium size, how much can you spend on security and securing your budget?
This is something that concerns me greatly. Is that SMEs cannot afford to do that. And that is, the problem is in the UK we have SMEs that are writing code with very specialist libraries that are then being integrated into large projects that I have no idea who you work for, but then you may be using this larger product library in order to have things that are quite costly. And it's actually the SME who weren't doing things properly that has then been integrated all the way up into something that's quite large. And so SMEs also need to consider this and just have it in the business plan for developing their product.
I mean, as the world gets more and more interconnected, and you're going to have this Internet of Things, actually, it's all pervasive. Every individual is going to be somehow linked to the Internet of Things. But how do you, as an individual, or as a small company, or as a what do you do?
This was something the European Union have. So the European Union, which is a union of countries within Europe, they have a legislative ability across countries within Europe, and they were talking about the possibility of holding people responsible for cybersecurity breaches of electronic devices that they own.
That's a bit harsh.
Very harsh, isn't it? Yes. Now, how does that change? I mean, just think about it for a minute. How does that change the way people act with electronic devices? People be much more. They have much more care. When you go into a shop, maybe hopefully not forward. You would go into a shop and say, okay, this mobile phone, well, it's so many inches wide, has this processor, and with all these high-level things you sell your phone at, you'll also be selling your phone on the security. This is updated in this fashion, so it means that you don't have to worry about it. In fact, we're selling this phone in order to mitigate or alleviate or give you financial compensation should you have to pay legal fees because you've been prosecuted and your phone has been broken into. But the thing, I keep on coming back to this. Security is in relation to your threats. And once you've identified your threats and what you have, these are the threats we want to protect against. And once you've drawn those lines, you're in a much better place than you are not even thinking about it. Because there are threats, and as I say, state actors. If somebody really wanted to get control of something that you own, and they had enough money, and they had enough time, they will do so.
One more questions coming from.
Okay.
Checking up all IoT devices. This from Emily.
So the question is, tracking of all IoT devices can be problematic and difficult to consolidate, like having different passwords and different devices. What would be the best defense to avoid exploits? What would be the best defense against using inappropriate authentication against Internet of Things? Because having 2 million Internet of Things devices and having 2 million passwords in each of the devices is not a good idea. What would be the best defense to avoid exploits and not use that of authentication? And unfortunately, my response is going to be that our authentication should be cryptographically based, which again is perhaps not the route that I want to advocate, because I think that we're doing something wrong with using cryptographic techniques to do this. Sorry. So, what are the techniques we use? Well, it's difficult to consolidate. So we can use other attributes of the device in order to authenticate it rather than a cryptographic technique. We can use other attributes of a person in order to use them to authenticate a device rather than passwords. So in the same way I was talking to a young gentleman in the audience here, that we can use various attributes of their computer as they're communicating. We can do exactly the same with Internet of Things.
I have a question. It's less to do with security, more to do about the Internet of Things itself.
Okay.
That this idea has been around for quite some time now.
Very long time.
Yeah, very long time, especially the idea of having it inside the home network.
Yeah.
But it's not really taken off. To a large extent, the way smartphones and all have become part of life.
It sort of
When do you
has,
see?
but nobody's really noticed.
Yeah.
So I have an Internet of Things device in my house. I have a sensor because I have a thermostat, and I have an actuator, the thing that turns my heating system on and off.
Yeah, this
Now,
is one example, but
one
the
example.
way everything smart house.
So your smart
home.
Your smart house, your
I've
smart
heard
home.
about it for a long time, but it's not really everywhere now.
No.
Yet. So when do you see that happening?
I see that happening when people feel that they have a need or a desire for it.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's something that is I can't think of the right term for it. If you want to show
Someone
off, you can say,
making
I've
out
got
money
these
and
lights.
time.
It comes down to that.
Yeah.
Can have
Could I just add to that?
It's
No,
not
sorry, can I just add to
Sorry.
yeah.
It's happening.
I have
but not to that
I
extent.
have answered the question.
That is
I'll give it time for
yeah.
15 years.
Another 15 years.
Yeah. 2013.
In fact, it has been happening. In fact, it has been happening for a long time. For example, if you look at a building today, actually, even 30 years ago, buildings are fairly automated. It's just that it's invisible to us.
Yeah.
And before things like Internet of Things becomes fashionable, words like M2M has been around for a long time for truck telemetry.
No, I was asking about the home environment. Like we talk about the fridge, smart enough
Oh, yeah.
to order the groceries and stuff like it hasn't really.
Yeah, usually because the
Yeah.
need is
But
not there.
that's also because of the middleware. Somebody needs to integrate all those things, so you're not having to talk to them each separately. You need one thing that actually joins it all together and operates your house for you, so that the fridge talks to your shopping list that talks to something else. And IBM is working on the middleware.
Okay.
And like,
So another 15 years, huh?
Well, the reason it's your point about middleware and communications, it's about this messages being passed from one place to another. It's about ensuring that there's connectivity there. The reason I say 15 years is because when are you going to change your fridge? So in a number of years' time, you'll change your fridge. And the number of fridges that are connected to the internet are increasing at the moment. And do you know what? When I change my fridge, it'll probably be less than 15 years, but I have no doubt that I'll buy something more high-tech than the fridge I currently have. Same with my washing machine, my freezer. My heating system, I did that. I replaced my heating system in my house. I replaced it with something I can control remote.
So are you showing off now?
Actually, home automation system has been commercially available, but you usually see them used by drug lords and the bad guys. Yeah, so
They could afford it.
yeah, only they can afford it. Yeah.
They could afford it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.